Oh, wait. Yes.
I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also, at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared, Tadyata gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhisvaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is just like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. And the Bhagavan, having spoken thus, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, ashuras, gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan.
Refuge.
I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Thank you, everybody. This is the third of these talks. And in this one, I'm going to start by, my main project here today is to try to give you a kind of point-by-point overview of how I understand Tsongkhapa's view of what it means to say that things are mere imputations. They're mere imputations by the mind. Right, it's easy to say the words, but then it becomes really hard to figure out what they mean. And both Tsongkhapa himself and His Holiness the Dalai Lama have talked about, that, yeah, it's good to get the words in the right order, but to actually have a realization of what exactly this means, and at the same time maintain your faith and confidence that what you do makes a difference, that karma works. In other words, it's very difficult to hold both of those in the mind at the same time, because it's easy to say only, emptiness and dependent arising mean the same thing, because emptiness means that things don't exist independently. But when you get into saying, well, dependent arising in this case really means that things are dependent on mental designation, right? And emptiness really means things don't have any way of existing apart from that mental designation. Then it starts to feel a little bit more difficult to understand how there can be good karma and bad karma, right? And because, it's all empty and designated by the mind. Yeah. So the bigger picture advice has always been, and this is the same with Tantra stuff too, as well as with the view, is not to, necessarily engage in some kind of self-deluded pride whereby you're thinking, well, this is the best view, so I have to adopt it as my view. It's like, no, it's the medical model that we talked about on the, 2 weeks ago. You have to think about what's the best medicine for me right now. And it's very clear that some people may readily find that the Prasangika view, as you start to work it out and start to understand it, and you see what the challenges are of reconciling ethics and mere imputation by thought, you may want to hold on to the idea that there's some kind of essential nature in things in order to make sure you don't fall to the extreme of nihilism, right? Because you're a middle way, trying to find, a path between these extremes. And, if we fall to an extreme of nihilism, then we're definitely in danger of creating hell for ourselves and other beings. Whereas if we are sincerely seeking the view, but are erring just a little bit to the side of still reifying things and not getting at the very, very, very subtlest object negation, well, we're not going to become free from cyclic existence, but we still can do a lot of good, right? And we can make a lot of progress, right? Without actually having fully understood or realized the most profound kind of emptiness, right? So there's the two extremes, but yeah, the encouragement is like to go as far as you can in understanding emptiness without going so far that you compromise your own faith. Okay, so I gotta say that by way of warning, because this is where I'm, really going to try to explain how I think this works. My sources for this are my own teachers, including Geshe Benden Chakpa, who's like a senior teacher at Drebo and Losaling in South India now, and Geshe Yeshe Tupke, who's a good friend of Geshe Benden Chakpa, so also a Loling Geshe, and Kensur Yeshe Tupten, who worked with Anne Klein on the book, The Path to the Middle. Path to the Middle by Anne Klein is basically a transcription of oral teachings by him. And then one of the most important sources, of course, is, Tsongkhapa words himself, especially in Gompa Rapsel, Illumination of the Thought, and the Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path. But also this little book called How to See Yourself as You Really Are by the Dalai Lama. Because the Dalai Lama has like a very sharp, serious guy, and he's been trying to understand what Tsongkhapa exactly was saying for a long time, right? And he's claiming in that book to have had some very specific insights. It's not a superficial book. It's kind of marketed that way with the title, How to See Yourself as You Really Are. So, it'll sound like a little bit of a self-help book or something. But I found that to be actually, some sections of that to be some of the most penetrating discussions in English on exactly what it would mean to say that things are mere imputations by thought instead of just saying the words. Yeah. Those, I guess, those are my main sources. I would say that my interpretation is also aligns with things that Alan Wallace says in the book Choosing Reality, which is a pretty old book now, one of his earlier books. And of course, this is a small part toward the back. He talks about this question, and he says something that aligns with what I said, although, yeah. So anyway, I would say those are my sources. And I mention that because this is difficult enough that not all Gyaltsen Geshes will agree. I have very specifically tell you that I have heard teachers take these exact same, teachings, and they're part of the same, lineage of Tsongkhapa, and give different explanations. So I'm not going to say that this is absolutely in line with the interpretation of the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition. I haven't checked it against that, and I don't guarantee that it is, right? It is a Gyaltsen interpretation, all right? Okay, so that's enough caveats. Let's just see what I think that I've figured out so far. So just repeat a couple slides from last time to work our way in. I was getting to the point last time of saying that since there's no essential nature at all, that is, there's nothing objectively out there on the side of the object that makes it this thing or that thing, right? Therefore, the usual idea of I'm calling it reliable knowledge. So it's, I'm not sure what FPMT usual language is, but, valid cognition, we used to say, reliable knowledge, it's pramana, in Sanskrit and Sema in Tibetan. So the kind of, let's say, original idea, what constitutes actually, a means of knowing something in a reliable way in Buddhist epistemology comes from Dharmakirti, who was not a Prasangika, right? And Dharmakirti was like saying that, there's a nature in the object, like fire is hot. And, if you have a mind that ascertains that this is something that burns, right? And in fact, it is something that burns on its own side because it's hot, right? That that's reliable conventional knowledge, right? So in other words, from the very earliest, attempt to systematically lay out what it meant to know something at the conventional level in Indian Buddhism, the idea was that there had to be a nature there in the object that you get at and correctly ascertain that there's a match between, what's going on here subjectively and what's actually out there on its own side, right? But here, you have to have some kind of, for Tsongkhapa is insisting that there has to be reliable knowledge at the conventional level, but somehow it has to function without there being any essential character that just like is out there on the side of the object for the mind to get at. So it's a problem, right? And so Tsongkhapa thinks that essentially that Chandrakirti has solved it if you read him carefully, and that he will try to explain to you exactly what Chandrakirti meant. But Tsongkhapa's critics, within Tibet, right, obviously disagree and have claimed that if you think there's such thing as conventional, reliable knowledge, you cannot also really understand emptiness. Because why? Because they're starting from the point of view that conventional reliable knowledge means getting at a certain nature in the object out there, right? And so then that's not really emptiness anymore, right? So he comes in. That's one of the what do you say? Some of Tsongkhapa's critics are quite vituperative. I don't know what the right word is, but yeah, some people will call him the omniscient Tsongkhapa and then turn around, in the next paragraph and talk about how ridiculous it is to make claims like the one that he's making. So then you start to wonder, and I don't know, when people say the omniscient Tsongkhapa, are they actually being sarcastic? Or, what I'm saying? It's like they don't literally believe that he's omniscient because they're trashing his view. Anyway. So because there's no essential nature, at all out there, reliable knowledge in Prasangika Madhyamaka has to be revisable. It has to be subject to correction. It could be that we really think that we know something and it turns out later that we don't. There's no way to, short of, being a Buddha, to know like objective, to know for sure that our conventional knowledge is actually knowledge. So we operate, there is conventional knowledge, but it's always being improved. It always has to be revised. So we know things well enough to get on. We know the difference between the red lights and the green lights and the traffic, and we know the difference between the cat and the hat and the table and the chair and so forth. And so we know all kinds of really useful things, and we try to refine and progressively understand, what does it mean for something to be alive? What is it, and then we get it down into the DNA and the RNA. And it's clear that conventional knowledge has made huge progress. It's constantly improved itself, right? In terms of how we understand what it means to be a human being, and how the material world works, okay? So yeah, things that people took for granted as, good explanations for the world, in the past turn out to be wrong, right? Yeah. So this I don't know if if you're interested, but in Western philosophy, there are all kinds of different theories about what it means to know something, and I won't go through that. But there's one type of theory called coherentism, and coherentism, I believe that Tsongkhapa here, his idea of conventional knowledge is a form of coherentism. In other words, we can't, conventional knowledge doesn't mean that when you have conventional knowledge, or you think that you have conventional knowledge, you could be wrong, right? There's no way to know absolutely for sure when you have it and when you don't, but it does exist, right? And one of the ways that you know that you thought you had it, but it turns out you didn't, is because you have some new conventional knowledge later on that shows that the older conventional knowledge wasn't knowledge at all. And Tsongkhapa, that's one of the three criteria, that he says for what it means for something to conventionally exist, right? Is that no other conventional mind discredits it, right? So as long as no other conventional mind is coming along and discrediting it, right, is showing that this is counterfactual, then, if this is what people believe, it can be used as the basis for operation. It's like we have some really good, working hypotheses in a sense about how the world is, but we always have to keep improving them. So this is the way I understand it. It's coherentism means that you acquire new knowledge insofar as a certain belief or idea it fits together with the other things that you know or think you know, so as to make a coherent, useful, effective view of the world. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like if some new information comes along and it doesn't fit with anything you've ever heard before, and all the things that you believed before help you make a lot of sense out of the world and have helped you operate really well, it's going to be very difficult for you to get you to accept the new information, right? So it's like, yeah, it has to be, there's a gradual progress usually. Through attentive conventional practice, we can gradually become more skillful in promoting happiness because we're refining our conventional understanding of what's really right in front of us. Yeah. So, right, concepts, stories, words, ideas, maps, they never exactly represent the world, right? An alternative view of knowledge in the West would be representational, that is more like Dharmakirti. In other words, there's something real out there and we have a real representation of it in here, and that's how we know that we know it. But that's never actually the case, and that's not the way Prasangika conventional knowledge works. You can't ever have a perfect mapping to the world just as is. Why? Because there's never any natural way that the world is in itself objectively apart from some perspective on it. This is the part, what he's trying to give the example about seeing the rope and thinking that it's a snake. And then he says, okay, so let's forget about the mind that wrongly thinks it is the snake and just talk about how that snake exists on its own side, right? And he's like, you can't talk about it, how it exists on its own side, because it doesn't actually exist on its own side at all, right? So the point is that you can make statements about what's true and what's not true conventionally, but it always has to be understood as being relative to a certain perspective, right? And not established out there objectively as the fact for every possible type of observer. I don't know, in the book Introduction to Emptiness, the example I use to try to talk about this is, a rainbow. So rainbows frequently used, right? An example of things that appear to be more solid than they are in Buddhism. But I'm using it in a specific sense that a rainbow, exists, and it arises in dependence upon light and water droplets in certain configuration, but it doesn't, those things do not have any nature at all in them as a rainbow. And a rainbow, you can't talk about there being a rainbow in the sky apart from a certain point of view on the earth, or in a plane or whatever, a certain point of view from which that the sunlight refracts in such a way that there's a rainbow, right? So a rainbow exists, and there are objects outside the mind that are involved as conditions for the existence of the rainbow, but there isn't any rainbowness at all, even conventionally, apart from a perspective of someone who's seeing that light refracted through the sky in that particular way at that particular angle. Do you see what I'm saying? A rainbow depends upon a point of view to be a rainbow. And in a sense, you say, like, okay, everything's like a rainbow. That's the end. It's like there are things that exist, and there are things that are true about them and not. But in order to say what those things are, you have to say for whom, for what point of view. That's okay. That's what we're going to explore. So anyway, what we need, given that this is how things are, what we can develop, even if we can't get like absolute unbreakable certainty, what we can develop is like better models, better stories, ways of being more effectively kind, that are ways of speaking to other people that are more conducive to healing and transformation. Okay. That's what we can do with conventional, revisable conventional knowledge means that we can keep getting better we can make progress, right, toward being the best kind of helpers, right? I'm trying to say that this fits with the idea of a gradual progress on the bodhisattva path. All right, so because of the word conventional, right, does mean conventional. Last time we were talking about how the word we usually translate as conventional from the Tibetan, gunso, doesn't really mean conventional. It means truth for a delusory mind, or something that's inflated or distorted out of proportion. But it's synonymous with tanye in Tibetan, which means conventional or a convention, right? So when we say conventional, we think it's like, well, it's a convention. Table manners are a matter of convention, for example. And so, it can be, it can feel like, how are we ever going to separate conventional reality from majority rule? Like most people in a certain place in a certain time, including the women, are taking it for granted that to be born as a woman is an inferior kind of rebirth. And does that mean that it actually is? Because that's the convention of that culture. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's like, that can't be right. That can't be right. I don't think that's right. And that's an example of why we have how we can improve conventional knowledge. Conventional knowledge isn't if only one person says that the world is round and everybody else thinks it's flat, right? The conventional reality is that it's round and everybody else is wrong, right? So, right. What is conventional reality? It's a matter of gradually refining our understanding and awakening to what's going on here. It's not a matter of just going along with popular opinion. So we can get more and more deeply attuned, to what's actually, attuned to what's actually happening here, keyed into what other people need, and work with them, be more effectively kind. And so, as I talked about before, only empty things work. If things weren't empty, if they had some fixed essence on their own side, then they would be locked in to being that, because that was their essential nature. So the way we have openness and fluidity and change and progress in the world, the way the world works in all realms of discourse, the way it works is because there isn't any fixed nature that freezes things as being what they appear to be now, right? This is very true, you know, when you, I don't know, people may have different senses, but yeah, I feel like this, you know, having attained the age of almost 66 now, I look at, you know, past versions of myself as like, as being quite different from how and who I am now. And that if I had some sort of fixed guyness, the degree of transformation that's already taken place physically and mentally would have been impossible. Anyway, so, right, there's proper and improper ways of doing things, of treating people, better and worse ways of doing things in terms of the outcomes that we seek, right? That's what emptiness allows. Okay, so that's kind of my attempt to sort of summarize what I was trying to say last time. So this is my, you know, beginning of my official points of the view, where I'm going to start with the fact that there are external objects, and then we'll end up in talking about how this relates to Tantra. So first of all, there are conventionally existent external objects. If you don't think that there are objects apart from the mind, then you're not a Madhyamaka. You know, you're probably, you know, a Yogacara of some sort. There are conventionally existent external objects. There means that there are objects that are not one entity with the mind. In the Yogacara or Chittamatra system, they say otherwise, that in their view, one of the main ways to talk about the delusion that's the root of cyclic existence is the delusion that there are objects that exist apart from the mind. And in their view, you know, our karma from the past ripens and in the sense of a division into subject and object. There's within the mind, subject and object appear from the same karma at the same moment, right? So like in a Yogacara view, the mind that sees the color of the table and the aspect of the table's color are simultaneous, right? Because they're simultaneous manifestations of exactly the same karma, and it's all happening as, you know, nature of my own mental continuum. So yeah, that's not the Prasangika view. And the Prasangikas are going to say that even though everything's merely imputed by thought, nonetheless, there are external objects. But so what these external objects appear to us as though they exist without needing to be imputed by the mind. They really very, very strongly present themselves to us as not needing us to be there. You know, this is indisputable, I think, most of the time, right? That there's like, they forcefully present themselves as not depending on mental imputation. Yeah, but in fact, objects exist only in dependence on imputation or designation or labeling. So since there are external objects that appear to exist apart, you know, without needing to be imputed, but in fact, objects exist only in dependence on imputation, it means that these external objects have no distinctive character or own nature, you know, on their own side. They don't have any fixed essence of their own. So in other words, conventionally, take an external object, it can be suitable to be designated as, you know, X from one point of view, and Y from a different point of view, and Z from a third point of view, even when X, Y, and Z are all contradictory. And this is the famous classical example of this is, you know, gods, ghosts, and humans go down to the river, you know, right, which could actually happen, right? Because gods can visit our world and hungry ghosts, you know, roam around our world. So we could be down at the river and there could be an invisible god on one side of us, an invisible hungry ghost on the other side, and we're all looking at the river together, right? And we see water and the hungry ghost sees pus and blood or molten lead or something, and the god is seeing nectar. And we're like, yeah, they would see that because they have this different kind of karma, right? Okay, they have a different kind of karma. Well, what does that mean? They have different kinds of bodies and minds. And what does that mean? That means that it's right for them to see something different there. And what they see is just as right as what we see, even though it's completely contradictory to what we see, right? And that's, so in Yogacara Chittamatra, they use that to try to prove that there are no objects outside the mind at all. It's all in the mind. But in Prasangika, they're saying, no, they're external objects, but these objects, in order to say what they are, in order to talk about their characteristics, you have to remember that the characteristics aren't objectively present in these external objects. They're relative to certain points of view, right? So every being, like all the little spiders and so forth. I'm assuming there's some spiders in this room with me somewhere because there's cobwebs that I can actually see at this moment. So I don't see any of the little spiders, but there's some very little spiders like lurking around somewhere in the rafters. And, you know, their world, the world as it appears to them here in the same room with me is like so radically different that I can't imagine it. And yet it's just as accurate. It's just they're unless they have some sort of, you know, damage to their brains or their eyes or whatever, it's just as real and true as the completely different world that I live in here in this room, right? So every being who lacks, and this is what comes from Chandrakirti, this is the root for this whole thing in Tsongkhapa. Every being that lacks a superficial cause of error, if you don't have an optical illusion, if you haven't taken any peyote, if you're not in the presence of a mirage, if there's not an echo coming off the other end of the valley, right? If you don't have any internal or external cause for some superficial distortion, then you have some conventional, reliable knowledge about what exists around you. And this is really important. And at the same time, it leads us to understand that the Prasangika idea of what it means to say they're external objects is different from our ordinary everyday idea of thinking about external objects. That things exist externally, but they have no way even conventionally of existing as this or that from their own side in and of themselves. So that's what it means to say they exist as mere designations, mere imputations, right? This I got from I got it originally from Geshe Benden Takpa, and then later Geshe Yeshe Tupke confirmed that this is the right way to say it. The table exists and atoms exist, but if you say that the table is made out of atoms, you haven't understood, right? Because you know, some other Buddhist systems might say, and I'm thinking here, you know, not Mahayana tenet systems, but lower tenet systems would say, yeah, the table is designated by mind, but it's designated by mind in the sense that there's an aggregation of atoms there. But it's really, atoms are there because they're designated by the mind also. there isn't any like fundamental thing that's just there from its own side without being designated from the mind. Yeah, in Vaibhashika, right, or there's a strong feeling that, yeah, a lot of the stuff we deal with, including persons, exists conventionally as designated by the mind, but it's designated upon the basis of some real things, right, which we could call atoms or whatever, partless particles, irreducible tiny bits, right, and these things are built up to the point that it becomes suitable to designate. In the Heart Sutra, though, you know, I don't know. It's very clear that it's very clear in the Heart Sutra, and it's arguably present also in the Vajira Sutta that we read, but it's a little bit less clear. But it's not just there. It's not just saying that the person is empty because it's just designated to the aggregates. The Heart Sutra is like extremely clear that the aggregates are just as empty as the person that's designated to them. So, you know, designate the person in relationship to aggregates, but we designate each of the aggregates in relationship to something else. And there isn't any bottom of it. There isn't any end to this because there isn't anything that's just there as the ground of being, you know, as a fundamental particle of reality. There isn't anything like that. Right? That's Prasanghika. And maybe you can see why this is a little bit, well, of course, people who hold this view have been you know, charged with nihilism, not by, you know, by other respectable Buddhists. And I may have mentioned last time that this is, oh no, maybe I didn't mention it in this class. It's a good reason to consider that, you know, the historical research on Madhyamaka in India suggests that Chandrakirti's view, this view that we're explaining, was not among the more popular views. he wrote quite a number of texts, which fortunately have all come down to us today. It wasn't that they weren't known. There is, you know, some small amount of commentary or literature on, but given the number of centuries that went by between his lifetime, right, and his beginning to become popular in Tibet, it's extraordinary how little is written about him in later Indian Buddhist literature. Mostly people are engaged much more with the Yogacara view and with the Svatantrika Madhyamaka view of people, right? There's different kinds of Svatantrika. Some is more amalgamated with Yogacara and other is rejecting of Yogacara. But in either case, you know, there's a lot of people, a lot of Mahayana Buddhists who, when they got into philosophy, felt that this view of Chandrakirti's was not really a suitable basis for the practice of the path, because it doesn't give you a foundation of something that's real on the side of the object to start with. Right. Yeah, I like to think about the table not being made out of atoms because that's my, you know, reflexive way that I think we think about the world. And if we just, yeah, I think personal, this is my personal advice. It seems like a useful thing to reflect on, because otherwise we think, oh yeah, Tsongkhapa believes in conventional reality of the table and I see the table, so all good, right? Yeah, and that's not undermining the false way these things appear. So I talked about this last time, but it's really important, you know, that so fundamental ignorance that's the root of needless misery is a mind, a consciousness that regards things and persons as having some way of existing from their own side. Rangnerne truba. Rangnerne truba means, it's like being, truba means to exist or be established. Rang means their own, ngerne, from their own side. Right, you're not, so you could translate it as objectively, literally, it's, you know, they don't have anything that makes them this or that coming from their own side without depending upon a point of view that designates them as this or that, right? So you get these external objects, and you know, if you're looking at external objects, and then they must be something. And why can't we just say what they are to start with, right? Because they aren't anything in and of themselves apart from a perspective on them. You think it was like, well, all these different kinds of beings are looking, the spiders and I are looking around this room, you know, and I have my way of looking at the basement that I'm sitting in, and spiders have their way of looking at it. And yeah, but what is it really? What if God were looking at it? You know, how does it look to Buddha? You know what I'm saying? It's like, can't you get outside, you know, the limitations of consciousness and see what these things really are in and of themselves? And the reason you can't is because they aren't any particular thing in and of themselves. There are this or that only relative to a perspective. And they can be different things relative to different perspectives. All right. So to see things as they are, we have to recognize that everything we see and hear, right, and so forth, everything we touch somehow depends upon designation by conventional consciousness. So, right, pushing forward. So I got this far, and then I started to think about, like, okay, I'm a human being. I'm not on any drugs. There's not any optical illusions. I'm looking around the room, and I see a bunch of different things. Do you know what I'm saying? I see different things. And if none of these things is anything from its own side, then why do I see different things? Why don't I just see, you know, the same, you know, what makes it that correctly, reliably appears to me as one object, and this over here reliably appears to me as something completely different, if they don't have anything on their own side, right? Yeah. So, right, I'm going to say that there's diversity in the world. You know, Buddha in the Heart Sutra is meditating on the profound perception of the diversity of the phenomenal world. There's diversity in these external phenomena, but not in the way we usually think about it. Because when we usually think about it, of course, we're thinking about things have diverse character because they have different kind of nature on their own side. So they have diverse character that makes them either suitable or unsuitable to be designated as, you know, this or that, but they're suitable to be designated as this or that relative to, in this case, a human perspective. And they're not suitable to be designated as those things relative to the tiny spider perspective, right? So they have diverse character, but what that character is can only be described or discussed or talked about taking into account a particular point of view. No object has any character from its own side without depending on its relationship to a conventional perspective. There isn't any objective way to characterize what kinds of things exist out there. And this is what Tsongkhapa means, I think, when with his example about the rope snake. I love the example because the rope snake is so much of an, you know, it's a cliched example in Indian philosophy. And he uses it in a completely different and creative way. It's not in Chandrakirti, as far as I can tell. I think he thought this up. He realized this, that he came up with this example as a way to explain this exact idea that yeah, there isn't any snakiness there on the side of the rope at all. There isn't anything objectively out there that characterizes what things are, even though they're diverse. So the diverse character of external objects can be specified and characterized only relative to the perspectives of particular kinds of beings. Okay, this is, I know, this is, anyway, this you won't find these words. You won't find this exact explanation in How to See Yourself as You Really Are, or any other, or Alan Wallace's Choosing Reality, or in Kensur Yeshe Thupten and Anne Klein's Path to the Middle, right? So this is me putting together those things with, you know, what Tsongkhapa says and what my own attempt to make sense of it. So we come to the question of whether fire is hot. Conventionally, fire is hot and water is wet. Ultimately, neither is either of those, right? People can agree in Madhyamaka, all Madhyamikas can agree on that. SVATANTRIKAs think that this conventional hotness of fire has to have some sort of natural basis. You know, it has to have fire. You know, ultimately, you can't say that fire is hot or not when you search for it, but conventionally speaking, you have to say that it has on its own side some sort of nature of hotness, and that's why it becomes suitable to designate it as hot, because it has some quality from its own side that makes it appropriate to be conventionally designated that way. Prasangikas think that this makes no sense, that the conventional existence of fire's hotness means that fire is hot only relative to certain points of view. So fire is hot, but it's not hot in and of itself. It's hot relative to certain correct, reliable perspectives, but not intrinsically. We talked about that last time. So think about lots of different examples, what's dangerous and what's hot and what's cold, and you know, there's so many examples that you can think of. It depends on, you know, who you're asking and what kind of being you're talking about. So this is a new slide I made up. You may be a Svatantrika, right? If you think fire is not ultimately hot because all things are empty of any nature that can be pinned down under analysis. But at the same time, conventionally, we have to say that fire has some nature of being hot. And that's why it's conventionally appropriate to say that it's hot, right? But so the Prasangikas say that the Svatantrikas are contradicting themselves by, on the one hand, saying that when you search for it, you can't pin down anything on the object side, and at the same time saying that there is some essential nature there. It's like, from the Prasangika point of view, if there were some conventionally existent essential nature on the side of the object, it would be findable under ultimate analysis, because it was the very essence of that object to be there. So in other words, this is what I said earlier, is like, yeah, it's not a contest to see who can hold the highest view, who can get closest to the edge of the cliff of nihilism, right? It's not a contest. We just adopt considering all these different views, which are, you know, expressed by all these different combinations of words. They're all medicines, and you know, I don't know if I mentioned, but I have known two Gyaltsen monks, who have privately told me that they are Svatantrikas in their personal view. Of course, they're loyal to Tsongkhapa and part of the tradition and so forth, but they don't personally hold a Prasangika view because they don't have a comfort with adopting this view and also maintaining their faith in the three jewels and so forth. Okay, so what about the Big Bang and the tree falling in the forest and so forth? If everything to exist depends upon a point of view, what about things that seem to exist when there's not obviously any perspective that observes them being that or this, right? The tree falls in the forest is the usual example in Western philosophy. So I'll just say some of the other answers I've heard, right? So a common one that Geshes will say is Well, Buddha sees everything. Buddha's omniscient, so that solved that problem. There's always a point of view from which you can say that, you know, this or that is happening. Things aren't happening objectively in and of themselves, because things that aren't observed by sentient beings in cyclic existence are still observed by the omniscient mind of Buddha. Explanation number one, okay? Okay, so there's that. If that works for you, then that's good. Another one is that there are sentient beings who are there. We just don't necessarily see them. Like tree falls in the forest, obviously there's sentient beings in the forest. That's the nature of forests. They've got little bugs running around in there. These are sentient beings, and there will be a point of view that they have with regard to a tree falling at me. You know, it changes their habitat, and so it's observable to sentient beings. Okay, so there's that answer, right? Then you have to think about, well, okay, what about the Big Bang? If there's a Big Bang, and is there a time when anything happens in the universe when there's no living being, there's no sentient being, you know, that observes it, but we can infer that it must have happened, otherwise we wouldn't be here having the conversation. All right. Okay, so yeah, this is an interesting problem. Yeah. Oh, my friends who are what would you say, proponents of objective reality. Their argument is that there are, you know, undiscovered properties of medicinal roots in the rainforest, and these exist, and because they'll be discovered later, but no one's observing those properties now. So how can they exist as mere designations by mind when there's nobody observing the medicinal properties of those undiscovered roots? Okay, that's an example that my physicist friend likes to use. Yeah, and then there's the idea that there has to be a designating mind present, designating each object as or right before we cognize it. So this, you know, this is something that I've read in Gyaltsen books, and it's a problem because then you have to come up with a way of positing a mind that's an observer of every single phenomenon all the time. So this is not what His Holiness says. In page 189 of How to See Yourself as You Really Are, he says to hold the view that there has to be a particular mind present in order to designate a table as a table every single second that it's a table, and it's not a table unless it's being designated by some particular mind as a table at that time, is, quote, most uncomfortable. And the process of designation cannot work that quickly. That's what he said. But you know, the more you think about it, the more I find the more implausible that kind of approach is. This idea of simultaneity, that something doesn't exist as a table unless all the time there's someone there imputing it as a table. So Kensei Yushi Tupten in Anne Klein's book, Path to the Middle, says that, you know, a pound of butter is conventionally, right, a pound of butter, even when it's not sitting on the scale. That's his example. And what he's, you know, okay, so I'm inferring, right, that he's making this same point that His Holiness is saying. There doesn't have to be, the scale represents the designated mind, you know. There doesn't, the extent or the measure of how real things are is that they're mere imputations by thought. But that is not to say that at every single moment that they exist, there has to be a mind right there designating them as whatever it is that they are. It's not plausible, to me anyway. So externally, there exist these conventionally diverse objects, I'm saying, meaning that they're objects of diverse character. They each gives rise to certain effects and not to other effects conventionally. But none of these diverse qualities are in the objects themselves. They're diverse character, which allows them, pear trees to, bear pears and not apples, for example, all right? And generosity, to lead to good consequences in the future instead of bad, right? Those diverse qualities are not in the objects themselves. They depend upon a point of view. And the point of view that designates doesn't have to be right exactly at that time. Just like a pound of butter doesn't always have to be on the scale in order to be a pound, right? Might arise in the very next instant, the mind that designates, or they might arise, the mind that designates might arise an eon later, in the case of the Big Bang, for example. There doesn't have to be simultaneity. So when we look at the world and we consider what objects are here in the prior instant and what other objects must have been there a short while or a long while before as causes and conditions for the ones that are appearing to us now, we correctly designate things in accordance with the conventionally diverse character relative to our perspective, right? So, yeah, there always was something that happened, a long time ago that was the starting point for this physical universe, right? And right, it was different from something else that might have happened. But what exactly that was is, designated whenever it was in the 20th century that the theory of the Big Bang was developed. So it's like, what, did the Big Bang exist at the time of the Big Bang? It existed at the time of the Big Bang relative to the perspective of a mind that hadn't arisen yet, but would arise later only because of the Big Bang. That's what I'm going to say. All right. So now I want to come to the question of how this relates to ethics. So just because, just hotness doesn't exist naturally from its own side, then, you have to face the fact that that means that virtue doesn't exist naturally from its own side. We consider what brings help, what's beneficial to ourselves and others, and virtue is designated relative to a point of view and not because some intrinsic character on the side of the mental state, right, or the action itself. So, for example, lying is non-virtuous, except when it isn't, right? Contextually, sometimes, right, lying is the kindest thing we can do. His Holiness's example was, lying about the Jews that you have hidden in your basement when the Nazis knock on the door. That's his example, right? So that's virtuous lying, right? So there isn't any specific action that's intrinsically virtuous or non-virtuous. There's a diversity of valid or reliable, unimpaired points of view, but this diversity cannot be so vast that it allows one culture's idea of virtue to be utterly beyond criticism by another. So in other words, this doesn't, in my interpretation, right, this isn't something that comes from any of the books that I've read, but I don't think that this takes us to cultural relativity or absolute relativism, because the idea is that what I think is that the system, right, is that you're born as a human according to certain kinds of karma that you have from the past. And that means, and it's another way of saying that the causes and conditions have arisen such that you have this particular kind of body and mind. And these biological features, right, give us a certain point of view on the world, and it give us certain sense powers, right? And when they're working, right, in an unimpaired way, and we have the same basic evidence to work with in terms of making up our culture, changing our culture, arguing that our social practices should be changed. Everybody's working with the same basic data because they have the same basic biological setup. That's the perspective of the tradition for sure. You can see it reflected in the gods, ghosts, and humans go to the river. They don't say, you know, Tibetans and Americans and Canadians go down to the river, right? It's like beings in different who have totally different kinds of bodies because of their rebirth. So then this leads me to, I don't know, I think maybe the word speculate is fair, that ethical conduct may be different in different realms, rebirth realms, and for different species as well, depending on what's helpful within their particular framework. Because virtue is being designated what's relative to what brings benefit and what's helpful, all right? And that isn't going to be the same for all kinds of beings, right? So this is basically, oh yeah, this slide just basically says what I was just saying. Yeah. Karma configures our minds and bodies so as to engender certain kinds of experiences that are shared by beings with similar karma. Unless something internal or external interferes, like that we've been talking about from Chandrakirti, then we can take these experiences as the starting point for reasoning and arguing and experimenting with what kinds of ways of talking, right, and what kinds of ways of acting are most helpful, are most effectively kind, right? And this is a big point for Tsongkhapa, even for reasoning about whether things are empty. How are we going to make an argument that things are empty without using an example of a chariot or a log or a light switch or a butter lamp? You know, it's like all these arguments use examples of which are part of our common experience. You know, you leave one of the examples in the Questions of King Melinda is leaving some milk out overnight, and you know it spoils and changes and it's different in the morning, and so is that the same milk or different milk than it was last night? Well, what is this thing milk if I don't have you know the kind of body and mind that allows me to identify this fluid as milk? Then the example doesn't make any sense to me. So all of our discussions about whether things are empty or not depend upon this basic data set that's like, I guess is a way to say it, which is the information that comes from our ordinary unimpaired sense faculties. And this is what conventional knowledge, you know, comes down to, is it's the, you know, if someone's arguing that it's evil to be vaccinated and someone else is arguing the opposite, they may claim to have different sets of facts, but behind those facts, going back far enough, there's like the common experiences that arise from having a human body and a human mind, right? It's hard to get back to that point, but right, and it doesn't make it easy for people to come to agreement. But the arguments that they make refer to shared human experiences, right? And that's all we have to work with to make arguments, not just about how we should, you know, deal with the death penalty, but also arguments about whether things are empty. Any argument or any thought we make for a claim about how things the nature of things ultimately or conventionally has to come back to our ordinary conventional experience, because that's what we've got to work with, right? And this is a huge point, Tsongkhapa. He's like, if you don't accept that even though all these conventional appearances are, you could say, contaminated or overlaid with this extra slathering of existential mayonnaise that makes everything appear as though it existed objectively, yeah, that's bad. But you can't say that all of that data is therefore useless, because if you do, you don't have anything to start with. You don't have any starting point for understanding anything, either about how to treat one another or what the fundamental nature of reality is. I made up an example that I just say it, so whether it's helpful or not, just might be helpful to somebody. In the book Introduction to Emptiness, I made up the example of somebody who's a witness to a traffic accident, and the question is, who ran the red light, right? But the witness, unfortunately, is colorblind. Right. So does that mean that this person can't function as a witness because they have this? So the colorblindness represents our colorblindness. We can't tell our existential ontological colorblindness is that we can't tell the difference between existence and inherent existence. They're just like right there together, right? And that's like the colorblindness of the witness. But the witness is still not useless. The witness can give valuable testimony about, was it the top light or the bottom light? Was it the big light or the little light? You know, the witness saw things that can be the basis for an argument, even if it's not distinguishing red and green, right? And we can't distinguish the red and green of conventional, of inherent existence, which never exists at all, but seems right there. And conventional existence, which is all things have, but to us, they appear right together. But that doesn't mean that we should throw out all of our ordinary, unimpaired, conventional minds, because this is all we really have for everything we want to do. Just a second, let me just, 8:16, okay. I'll go back in there. Okay, so the question that comes up is like how this relates to Tantra. I haven't, explored the history of the relationship between Tantra and Prasangika Madhyamaka in depth at all. But there is clearly historically, it seems to be understood now that there is a relationship between the popularity in Tibet starting in the 11th century of Chandrakirti, who, as I mentioned, had kind of been sidelined in later Indian Madhyamaka, but starts to become popular at the same time that the highest yoga tantras are coming into Tibet. So people who are, understanding Chandrakirti in a way that Tsongkhapa thinks is wrong, but in a way that they were finding very compatible with the practice of highest yoga tantra. So how does this view, as I've interpreted it, right, how does it fit with tantric practice? So knowing that all things are empty of existing from their own side does not cancel out the fact that a spoon is a spoon. Conventional facts are facts. If somebody's you have to conventional facts are facts, right? That's what facts are. And for Tsongkhapa, is their conventional facts, things that are known by unimpaired, ordinary conventional minds. So the alternative perspective of Tantra is one in which ordinary appearances are abandoned, but this doesn't cancel out the conventional reliability of my perception that I have only two arms and one head, right? If I'm doing a practice in which I'm visualizing this as a pure mandala, and in which I have 11 heads and 8 arms or something, this is a practice, but it's not It doesn't mean that conventionally I, Guy Newland, have that many heads and arms right now, right? Yeah, because if it did, you know, if the alternative perspective of Tantra, that this is the Pure Land, right, and this, I adopt the attitude that that this is the body of the Buddha right now, right, and this is the Pure Land, right, and that, right, then it would be wrong to recognize non-virtue even when we see it. It's everything that's appearing to us is part of the blissful mandala. And what if, you know, what's appearing to us is something that's actually quite horrible? So of course, you know that tantric practice involves imagining as an aspiration and a rehearsal, a perspective that is not yet correct from one's current point of view. At least this is the way Tsongkhapa would interpret it. And His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, does say this very clearly in, I think it's the book, How to Practice, toward the end when he gets to Tantra. So in theory, we could pick any other sort of being, and some people do, like horses or, you know, people, I don't know, yeah, try to cultivate their minds into the idea that they're different kinds of animals, right? That's some kind of thing that certain people have. Seems like it was a practice, this is tangential, in ancient India too, that there were some people who thought that a path to liberate, at the time of the Buddha, you know, that there were some sadhus who were experimenting, right, with all different kinds of ways of thinking and looking at the world. And some people thought, well, we should do like dogs because they don't seem to have, you know, anxiety and depression that humans have. They you know, their lives are simpler, and we should try to become more dog-like and adopt dog behavior and so forth. Yeah, and there are people like this today who intentionally cultivate the mindset that their true identity is a cat or something like that. Yeah. So we could pick any other sort of being instead of a Buddha and just train our minds to see things as they're seen from that other being's point of view as best we can, and successively approximate, you know, and then within the context of long time practice, right, then your mind can become more and more like the mind, you know, that you want it to be. So I don't know what you use for flagell in FPMT. We used to always call it divine pride because that's what it literally is, God pride, flagell, divine pride. But I kind of like Thupten Sherdron, Venerable Thupten Sherdron at Sravasti Abbey uses divine dignity because, of course, pride is, you know, a non-virtue. And Lagel is not a non-virtue. So she came up with dignity. I like it. Divine pride or divine dignity, of course, is taking to mind with conviction that one is the deity, is the Buddha that you're visualizing or imagining. And it's not a wrong consciousness in that it's an intentional adoption of this kind of alternate perspective. In other words, it only becomes wrong if there's no framework within which the practitioner no longer understands that she's a human being doing the practice. You know, it's like willing suspension of disbelief when you watch a film, right? If you got so into the film that you thought that the imaginary world that the film is creating was the actual world, and that you were not a person watching this film, but you were in this film, right? Then you would be out of touch with conventional reality, right? And like that, this is not wrong to adopt within a certain framework of understanding, what the current conventional situation is. But for the sake of practice, with a specific intention, adopt a conviction that something that you wish to come about, that you want to see come about, is in fact the case already. Yeah. So it's like, it's like method acting, or like, where you get into the role, but you don't necessarily go insane. The idea is to get into the role without losing track of the fact that that's exactly what you're doing. You're not that character, right? But you're an actor who's gotten into the character of that character. So yeah, I don't teach about Tantra a lot, but when I do, I like to use this quote from Andre Breton, who's sometimes called the father of surrealism, who said, "The imagined is what tends to become real." And so I challenge my students to consider whether this is consistent with Buddhist philosophy as we've been studying it. Does the imagined tend to become real? Is it true as a general statement that the imagined is what tends to become real? My own thought about this is that usually, yes. That is, when we focus our minds on certain outcomes to which we aspire, right, that it opens up opportunities or possibilities of transformation that might not have occurred to us before, and it helps create causes and conditions for the things that we're imagining in a hopeful way, right, to actually come about in the future. Maybe not in this lifetime, but right. But the one caveat, or no, the one objection that I make from a Buddhist point of view to Andre Breton's is that people have been beginninglessly, right, in the tradition, beginninglessly imagining things as objectively, inherently existent. There's never been there's no case of something that's been more widely and persistently imagined and yet has never become real. And that's because it can't become real. It's contrary to the basic reality of all things, which is emptiness and dependent arising. So if we're imagining something that's like categorically impossible, I guess is the right way to put it, is categorically impossible, then no matter how much we imagine it, it's not going to come back. We can't pray inherent existence into existence. But we can pray for peace, right? And it's not magic, but it's not pointless either. It's creating a positive potential. Yeah. Well, that kind of worked out just right? Supposed to stop at 8:30. I'm out of things to say. My mouth is dry too. My throat is worse. So what do you think? Oh, B. B wants to ask a question.
Is that okay? Your mouth is dry.
Mm-hmm. Fire away.
The table that is not made of atom, that is merely imputed, what category of phenomena is it considered? It is not form, it is not consciousness. Is it non-associated compositional factor?
Well, everything. So when we study those categories, which is useful, right? Then we're studying these things usually from a SVATANTRIKA point of view. This is actually this is very intentional, and it becomes one of the challenges that when we, and also traditionally, in Tibetan culture, learn about Buddhist worldview through, especially, but not only through Gyaltsen sources, we learn about it through certain interpretation of the SVATANTRIKA point of view, which is not a Mahayana tenet system, right? And so there is form, but form is designated by mind. The point is not to say that there isn't form and that we can't classify some things as form, but you have to understand that things fall into this or that classification based on their being designated that way by a mind. So there's this definition of form as Dölpopa, or something is suksarungwa. So things that are Dölpopa means things that are made out of atoms, things that are atomically established, right? If you think of that as form, then you're thinking of form as in a way that's not consistent with the Prasangika view. If you call it that form is that which is suitable to be designated as form, then it is consistent with the Prasangika view. As things are not made, things can't be made. When you say that things are made out of atoms, you're allowing yourself to believe that they're set up from their own side.
Well, would Prasangika say that form is obstructive?
Yeah, it's obstructive because it's suitable to be designated as obstructive, but it's not obstructive because it's made out of atoms.
So what would Prasangika say the table that is merely imputed, what is it suitable to be imputed as? What sort of phenomena?
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
I mean, they impute person to be non-associated compositional factor.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'll say a table is a form. So being a form doesn't mean that it's made out of atoms. That's what I'm trying to say. If you think that being a form means that things are made out of atoms, that's where you have to remember everything is merely imputed by mind. So if you think made out of atoms, it's not a question of whether the atoms are there or whether it's reasonable to talk about atoms. It's to say that this is made out of atoms. It means it exists by way of the presence of these atoms configured in some way. And it doesn't take into account the fact that it's only a table based on my designation.
Well,
that's what I'm trying to get across.
Whatever we call it, there is something physical there.
I'm gonna say yes, that's right. There are objects that are there. There are objects that are there, and also they're diverse in character. This is my interpretation.
So whatever that is physical there is not the table, because table is the imputation.
Oh, I see what you're saying. That's not exactly right. Thank you for that question. Maybe that gets to the nub of the matter. No, things being imputations is how they exist. Imputations are not wrong. The fact that it's a table is the same as saying it's imputed as a table. That's the same. Everything is imputedly existent. Everything that exists is imputed. Buddha is imputedly existent. Nirvana is imputedly existent. This doesn't mean that they don't exist. That's how they exist. That's how everything exists in Prasangika. Like Nagarjuna has a whole chapter on how the Buddha is empty of inherent existence. He has a whole chapter on that. So Buddha is, not, essentially Buddha, whereas, him being not essentially Buddha doesn't cancel out him being Buddha. And so this is a table, this is a table because it's imputedly existent as a table. And that's the only way that it really could be a table.
So what category of phenomena would you call it? And the parallel I'm drawing it here is the person that is imputed upon the five aggregate. And Prasangika or somebody say that it is non-associated compositional factor. They gave it a label, non-associated compositional.
No, I know, I understand.
So what label would we give an imputed table?
Yeah, I would say that it's form. You can have imputedly existent form, just like you have imputedly existent non-associated compositional factors and imputedly existent consciousnesses.
Well, in the case of person and the five aggregates, we give a different label for what is imputed upon the five aggregates.
But you understand
so the table is imputed upon all the different molecules of the table. If I may put it that way, the different parts of the table, the top, the legs, and all of that.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And say if I don't use the same word as table, I say that I don't know, I use a different word. Then what referring to what we're imputing upon.
Yeah. It doesn't matter what word, Gyaltsen in Tibetan, right? Or mesa in Spanish. It doesn't matter what word we use to talk.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what word.
That's not the point.
But the difference in the words there is indicating to us the distinction between the imputation and the basis.
So when I look at my own mind and I say, on what basis do I impute a table? It usually doesn't involve atoms or molecules at all. It's like certain shapes and sizes and colors, and right.
We can say the parts of the table. I mean,
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah, you can say right. So the point is just like I was mentioning, the Heart Sutra isn't just about how the person is empty because the person is imputed to the aggregates. It's about the fact that the aggregates are empty as well because they're imputed as well. And it's imputation all the way down. All the parts of the table are also imputed and so forth. Like this is a table leg over here to my left, but it's not objectively a table leg.
Then
right?
The question would be even more relevant because if we keep going like that, there is nothing physical that we can touch. It's all imputation. So what is that imputation?
So it's not that there's nothing physical that we can touch. We have the tactile sense faculty, right? We can physically touch objects. There are external objects and we can physically touch things just like we can physically see things.
But the thing that we touch is not the thing that we impute.
Well, what else are you going to touch? The only things that exist are imputedly existent things.
That's precisely my question.
Yeah.
I mean, I keep coming back to the person and five aggregates because precisely we give a different label to what we impute upon the five aggregates. Sometimes we use the word I, the I, the mere I that is imputed upon the five aggregates, or if I may, the mere I that is imputed upon the continuum of the clear light mind.
Yeah, you've obviously been reading a lot of stuff, right? Exactly.
So we give different names to the different parts so we can see the distinction. But with a table, we impute table upon the basis of the table. So it all rolls into one, but there's distinction there.
I think I've lost the thread of the question. Sorry. I think
the imputed table, what category of phenomena it is?
I'm going to say I already said I'm going to say that it's a form because I can touch it. It's yeah.
So the imputed consciousness is consciousness.
Consciousness is imputedly existent consciousness. That's how things exist, is because they exist relative to point of view.
So the I that is imputed upon the continuum of the clear light mind, why is not mind? Why is that I not a mind?
Why is it not a mind? Is that the question?
Yes. Yeah. If the I that is being imputed upon the continuum of the clear light mind, given the logic of what you just said, if I follow it, then the mere I that is imputed upon the continuum of the clear light mind, so it would be the I is a mind.
I don't know that it's why do you think it's a mind? I was going to say.
I was just following your logic.
You think that it's a mind because it's merely imputed.
No, I don't think it's a mind. I've been told that it is. I don't know what it is, but I don't know what it is. But
Yeah,
the,
well, it's
but
a
the
hard
text told me
question.
that it is a non-associated compositional factor.
That's what I was going to say. It's a non-associated comp because yeah, it's the
But
person.
following your logic, that table that is being imputed upon the part of the table is form, and the mind consciousness that is imputed upon the continuum of mind is mind.
Yeah.
And why is the I that is imputed upon the continuum of the clear light mind is not mine?
Um, what? It's a merely conventionally existent person. So
It's a
neither a consciousness nor form, but something that's imputed to be existent in relationship to the continuum of the clear light mind. So, right? It's not consciousness itself. It's the mere person. I feel like I'm not really getting.
I'm just drawing the parallel between the imputation of different phenomena. So if one were to say that imputing table upon the part of the table is form because the part of the table is form, and imputing a mind upon the continuum of mind.
No, I wasn't saying that. I wasn't saying the table is form because part of the table is form. I was saying I'm going to call it form because conventionally speaking, I can touch it and pick it up, and I can't push things through it, right? It's suksu rumwa. It's suitable to function as form, which in Prasangika means it's suitable to be designated as form, right? I know it seems circular, but that's the way you understand it. It's something that's appropriate for us to designate as form.
So the mind that is being imputed upon the continuum, the moments of mind, because it's suitable to be designated as mind.
Yes, well, yeah. But okay, I don't get the question. You're saying that
the table is suitable to be called a form because that's the definition.
Yeah.
And the mind that is imputed upon the moments of mind.
Yes. Okay.
So is that a mind because it is suitable to be designated as mind? Is that the explanation?
Yeah, I think so. I think what it's suitable to be designated as mind means that it's appropriate to classify it or understand it as mind relative to our point of view. Yeah. There isn't anything behind it, right? Or inside it that makes it essentially different from something else, but relative to our conceptualizations, it's useful, right? Let me say it that way. It's useful to categorize it or classify it as mind. It would be not so useful to classify the table as mind. If we could, but then it might not be the most effective way to operate in the world.
I'm inclined to think that the imputed table is a non-associated compositional factor just as person.
Okay.
That's what I'm inclined to say, but I don't know. I'm just
okay.
What you think.
Well, I can see your point. I'm inclined otherwise because I feel like if you go down that route, you're going to end up saying that everything's a non-associated compositional factor because everything's a mere imputation.
Yes, that's what
you're saying. Yeah.
Was leading to, and that seems really, really radical.
Well, I don't want to say that. I don't want to say. Yeah. I don't want to say that everything's a non-associated compositional factor. I'm just saying that things exist as mere imputations, and some of them are appropriate to be designated as form, and some as mind, and some as non-associated compositional factors. the fact that things are designated by mind doesn't make them, yeah, well, you understand. It doesn't make them more of the nature of mind.
Non-associated compositional factor is not of the nature of mind.
Right.
It's just a whole category of phenomena that is unique to Buddhists. I mean, nobody else, I think, talk about that.
I don't know. I'm not sure I know all the other non-Buddhist tenet systems well enough to say.
No, I'm sorry, I'm just talking. Yeah. So, well, thank you. Thank you for this discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Okay. Well, we just have one question, but now it's like 8:45. 2 participants raised their hands. What does this mean? I don't know. Did somebody, I don't know what to do. Snehi, tell me what to do.
I think because it's 8:44, maybe we hold the questions till our next class. I think it's been a long evening for you talking as well.
Yeah, yeah. People can email me questions too, you know. A week is a long time.
Okay.
You can give people my email address. I mean,
Okay.
you have it, and I think Jeff has it, probably. Oh yeah, Jonathan has it. So just everybody can have my email address and send me questions. Okay. That's fine. Okay. Thank you very much. I thank you for the opportunity to rehearse these things, and also especially to be, right, for getting my mental wheels working, right? Thank you, everybody. Good night.